I bought my dream cottage in secret. Then my neighbor texted, "Who are those people moving in?" The message from Diane lit up my phone screen on a quiet Tuesday morning. I was sitting at my kitchen island in my main house, sipping black coffee, enjoying the silence of retirement. I had spent 30 years working as an accounting manager, raising my son David alone after my husband passed away. I saved every spare dollar. My dream was a small, quiet cabin on the lake 2 hours north. My heart thumped against my ribs as I opened the security app on my phone. I tapped the live feed for the cottage driveway. My breath caught in my throat. A silver minivan and a large SUV were parked right on my newly laid gravel. I recognized the minivan instantly. It belonged to my daughter-in-law, Sarah. I watched the screen as Sarah emerged from the trunk carrying 2 heavy grocery bags. Following right behind her was a man I recognized as her father, dragging a large cooler toward my porch. Her mother was already on the deck, unfolding my patio chairs and adjusting the umbrella as if she had lived there for years. They weren't just visiting. They were moving in for a vacation. I sat there staring at the small screen, a cold realization settling into my chest. I had worked overtime, skipped vacations, and driven a used car for 15 years to afford those pine floors and that view of the water. Now, strangers were tracking mud across it. The biggest question wasn't why they were there. I knew Sarah's entitlement perfectly well. The real question— I zoomed in on the video feed. Sarah's father walked up to the front door, inserted a silver key, and pushed it open without hesitation. How did they get a key? I didn't cry. I didn't throw my coffee mug against the wall. I just closed my eyes and retraced my steps over the last few weeks. Then it hit me. 2 weeks ago, David had asked to borrow my SUV to pick up some lumber for his home project. I had handed him my entire key ring because my car key was firmly attached to it. On that ring was the brand new, slightly shiny brass key to the cottage. I remembered getting the keys back the next day and noticing they felt slightly disorganized, but I had brushed it off. They had copied my keys. David must have found the deed online. Public records were easy to search if you knew where to look. I remembered a dinner 6 months ago. I had vaguely mentioned wanting to invest my retirement savings into a small property. Sarah had slammed her fork down. "You should be helping us upgrade our house," she had insisted, her voice tight with judgment. David had simply nodded, staring at his plate, letting his wife dictate how I should spend my life savings. That was the exact moment I decided to buy the cottage in absolute silence. I looked back at the live feed. Sarah's kids were now running across my hardwood floors, holding juice boxes. I didn't call David. I didn't text Sarah to demand an explanation. Arguing with them was like talking to a brick wall. They would just spin it to make themselves the victims. Instead, I stood up, walked to my bedroom, and grabbed a small duffel bag. I threw in 2 changes of clothes, my thick sweater, and a heavy flashlight. Before leaving the house, I made one phone call to Diane, the neighbor who lived down the road from the cottage. "Diane?" "Yes, Barbara. They just dragged a grill onto the deck." "Good. I'm on my way." The drive north usually felt peaceful, but today my grip on the steering wheel was iron tight. I kept my foot steady on the gas, letting the crisp autumn landscape blur past my windows. Before reaching the lake, I pulled into the parking lot of a local hardware store. I grabbed a red shopping cart and walked straight to the security aisle. I picked out a heavy-duty master padlock, a thick steel chain, and a brand new digital deadbolt that required a programmable code rather than a physical key. I added a cordless drill and an extra battery pack to the cart. The cashier smiled warmly, commenting on the crisp weather, and I returned the smile easily. My heart rate was completely steady. When I finally turned onto the gravel road leading to my property, I didn't park in the driveway. I pulled my car onto the grassy shoulder a few hundred yards away, hidden behind a thick row of oak trees. I grabbed my shopping bag and walked quietly toward the house. The music hit me first, loud, obnoxious pop music blasting from a Bluetooth speaker they had set up on my porch railing. Sarah's father was sitting in my favorite rocking chair, drinking a beer, tossing peanut shells over the railing into my garden. Through the kitchen window, I could see Sarah pulling my expensive pots and pans out of the cabinets, organizing her groceries. They looked incredibly comfortable. They looked like they owned the place. I didn't march up the front steps. I didn't knock on my own door. Instead, I slipped around the side of the house, keeping out of sight of the windows, and made my way toward the small wooden utility shed attached to the back of the property. It was time to make them a little less comfortable. The utility shed housed the main water valve, the electrical breaker box, and the Wi-Fi router. I opened the creaky wooden door. First, I reached for the main water pipe. I gripped the heavy red iron valve and turned it sharply to the right until it locked into place. The faint humming of water moving through the house instantly ceased. Next, I opened the breaker panel. I didn't want to spoil the food in the fridge just yet. I wanted them to pack it up and leave. But I flipped the heavy switches for the hot water heater, the living room outlets. Finally, I reached up and unplugged the Wi-Fi router, entirely tossing the power cord into my purse. I stepped out of the shed, closed the door, and wrapped the thick steel chain I had just bought through the handles. I snapped the heavy-duty padlock shut with a loud, satisfying click. I walked around to the front deck and took a seat on the wooden bench near the stairs. I crossed my legs, folded my hands in my lap, and waited. It took less than 3 minutes. The loud music died instantly as the porch outlets lost power. A few seconds later, I heard a loud thud from inside, followed by Sarah's shrill voice. "Dad." The Wi-Fi just dropped, and the TV went black. A moment later, the kitchen window slid open, and Sarah's mother yelled, "Sarah, the sink isn't working. There's no water coming out." The front door swung open violently. Sarah marched out onto the porch, holding her phone up in the air, frantically searching for a cell signal. Her father stood up from the rocking chair, looking confused. Then Sarah lowered her phone. Her eyes landed on me. She froze. The color drained completely from her face. "Hello, Sarah." I smiled, adjusting my coat. "Enjoying your vacation?" For a long moment, the only sound was the wind rustling through the pine trees. Sarah's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. Her father quickly set his beer bottle down on the floorboards, looking suddenly very awkward. Barbara Sarah stammered, taking a step back. "What? What are you doing here?" "I'm sitting on my porch," I replied, my voice perfectly level. "The better question is what your parents are doing in my guest bed." Before Sarah could formulate a lie, a third vehicle pulled into the driveway. It was David. He parked his truck, hopped out holding a massive bag of charcoal, and froze the moment he saw me sitting on the bench. "Mom," he choked out. I stood up slowly, brushing a fallen leaf from my slacks. David looked at Sarah, then back at me, his shoulders slumping. "Mom, listen. We found the property records online. We knew you bought the place, but you weren't even using it this weekend. Sarah's parents drove all the way from Ohio, and we just thought it would be a nice surprise family getaway. We were going to tell you afterward. You broke into my house," I corrected him. "You stole my keys, copied them behind my back, and moved strange." Sarah immediately crossed her arms, her defensive instincts kicking in. "Strangers. They're your grandchildren's family. You're being incredibly selfish. You have this huge place just sitting empty while we're cramped in our house. You should be happy the kids are getting fresh air." I didn't raise my voice. I didn't engage with her manipulation. I just looked at my watch. "It is currently 2 o'clock, I announced. You have exactly 30 minutes to pack everything you brought and get off my property." Sarah let out a loud, mocking laugh. "Excuse me. We just spent 4 hours driving here. We unpacked a week's worth of groceries. We are not leaving. You can't just kick us out into the cold, Barbara. The kids need a place to sleep." David stepped forward, holding his hands up like a referee. "Mom, please, just let us stay the weekend. We're already here. Don't ruin this for the kids." I didn't argue. I didn't explain myself. I walked straight past them, through the open front door, and stepped into my kitchen. The counters were covered in their mess. I opened the bottom drawer, pulled out a box of heavy-duty black trash bags, and walked purposefully down the hall toward the guest bedroom. Sarah's parents' suitcases were open on the bed. I snapped a trash bag open, grabbed an armful of their clothes, shirts, pants, socks, and dropped them unceremoniously into the plastic bag. "Hey, what are you doing?" Sarah shrieked, running into the room with David close behind her. "I gave you a timeline," I replied calmly, grabbing her mother's toiletry bag and dropping it into the trash bag. "Since you refused," David grabbed my arm gently. "Mom, stop. You're acting crazy." I pulled my arm away with a sharp yank, staring directly into my son's eyes. "I paid for this house. I maintain this house. You do not dictate what happens under my roof. You have 25 minutes left." Sarah's father appeared in the doorway, looking deeply embarrassed. Sarah grabbed the kids. "We're leaving." Sarah glared at me, her face red with absolute fury. She stormed into the kitchen. I followed her out, holding the full trash bag. She marched over to the kitchen island, snatched the silver Cottage keys off the marble counter, and shoved them deep into her purse. "Fine. We'll leave," she sneered. "But I'm keeping these keys. You clearly need time to cool off." Sarah stood by the door, clutching her purse, a victorious smirk playing on her lips. She genuinely believed that holding the physical keys gave her leverage. She thought she was still in control of the situation. I didn't ask for those keys back. I didn't even blink. I walked over to the shopping bag I had brought from the hardware store and pulled out the cordless drill and the digital deadbolt box. I walked right past. Sarah stepped up to the front door and positioned the drill against the screws of the old brass lock. The loud whine of the drill echoed through the quiet house. Sarah's smirk vanished. She watched in stunned silence as I effortlessly backed the screws out, pulled the old lock cylinder completely out of the door, and dropped it into the nearest garbage can with a heavy thud. "Keep the keys, Sarah." I smiled, unwrapping the new digital keypad. "They're useless now, just like your opinion on my finances." David stood in the hallway looking completely defeated. He finally understood that I was not playing a game. I wasn't going to negotiate, and I wasn't going to back down. "Come on, Sarah. Let's go," David mumbled, picking up the cooler. As Sarah reached the driver's side of her van, she turned back one last time. "You know what?" she spat. "If you treat family like this, then you don't get to see your grandkids. Don't bother calling us for Thanksgiving." I stood on my porch, holding my drill. "Have a safe drive home, Sarah." I watched their cars kick up dust as they sped down the gravel road. Once they were gone, I finished installing the keypad. The house was quiet again. It was mine. I slept beautifully that night. The lake was completely silent, and the air smelled like pine and fresh water. The next morning, I made myself a cup of tea and sat at the dining table. I opened my laptop. Handling the physical boundaries at the cottage was only the first step. Sarah's threat about Thanksgiving had confirmed exactly what I was dealing with: an entitled child using my grandchildren as a weapon. If they wanted to draw lines in the sand, I would gladly bring the concrete. I logged into my primary bank portal. For the last 3 years, I had been quietly helping them out. I had set up an automatic transfer of $400 every month to cover David's car lease. I was also paying the $800 monthly tuition for my eldest grandson's private preschool directly from my checking account. David and Sarah made 6 figures combined. They didn't need my money. They just preferred spending theirs on expensive dinners and vacations while I subsidized their lifestyle. I clicked on the car lease transfer, cancel automatic payment. I clicked on the preschool tuition wire, cancel automatic payment. Next, I navigated to my credit card account. Years ago, I had given David an authorized user card for emergencies only. Over the last few months, I had noticed random gas station charges and grocery runs showing up on it. I had ignored it to keep the peace. Peace was no longer the goal. Respect was. I clicked on David's name. Remove authorized user. Disable card. I closed the laptop, feeling a massive weight lift off my shoulders. I didn't send them a warning text. I didn't write a long, emotional email explaining my feelings. Actions speak louder than words, and my actions were finally matching my self-worth. I packed my bag, locked my new digital door, and drove back to my primary house. The first thing I did when I got home was call a locksmith to change the locks there, too. The fallout arrived on Tuesday afternoon. I was in my backyard pruning the rose bushes when my phone started vibrating violently in my pocket. I checked the screen. David. I wiped the dirt from my gardening gloves, tapped the screen, and placed the phone on speaker, resting it on the patio table. "Hello, David." "Mom? What did you do?" His voice was a panicked pitch. I could hear the background noise of a busy grocery store. "I just tried to buy groceries, and the emergency card declined. And Sarah just checked our joint account. The car payment didn't transfer. The school call." I carefully clipped a dying rose from the stem. "I bought a cottage, David. Property taxes and maintenance are expensive. I had to adjust my budget. Since you and Sarah both work full-time, I know you can handle your own expenses. You didn't even warn us." He yelled, the panic turning into anger. "Sarah is furious. You're punishing us because of the cottage. You can't just cut us off. You didn't warn me when you copied my keys, I replied, calmly, dropping the clipped rose into my bucket. You didn't warn me when you moved your in-laws into my bed. You took my support for granted while disrespecting my property. Mom, please. You have to fix the school payment. Sarah is threatening to block your number. Let her, I answered easily. I am not an ATM and I am not a doormat. When you are ready to apologize and act like adults, you know where I live. But the financial support is permanently over. Goodbye, David. I pressed the end button before he could say another word. I didn't block his number. I just muted his notifications. 3 months passed. The hot summer faded into a crisp, brilliant autumn. The leaves around Lake George turned deep shades of crimson and gold. I spent most of October at the cottage, waking up early to watch the mist roll off the water,